Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene and I talk about eating disorder recovery and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food and with movement. And today I am so excited for this new interview with Tabitha Farrar. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you heard of her. I know that my clients definitely heard of her because I talk about her a lot. I actually talk about her books a lot. She wrote what a lot of people refer to as the Recovery Bible. And we're going to talk about extreme hunger, about rewiring your brain, and everything connected to eating disorder recovery. So stay tuned until the end. And as always, let me know how you like this video, let me know if you have questions, and let me know if there are other topics that you would like me to cover. I'm here today with, can you tell me how to pronounce your name
Yeah.
correctly?
So Tabitha,
Tab-
Farrar.
Awesome. Okay, I'm here with Tabitha Farrar. And I just said before we started the interview, I actually read the books myself when I was in recovery. And as many of my clients know, I'm also always telling people to read the books because I really think that it's a great approach and it's great work. And so, yeah, today we're going to talk about recovery. We're going to talk about the content of your books and a lot of topics. And so, Tabitha, do you mind telling everyone who's watching a little bit more about your story and about what you're doing now?
Sure. Um, I developed an eating disorder, anorexia, when I was about 17, so quite late on, and then was very resistant, shall we say, to recovery. Very, I wouldn't even talk to anybody about it. I wouldn't even admit I had an eating disorder. So, um, and then when I was after about 10 years, I guess I got very sick and tired and lonely and was exhausted, and I decided to recover. And I'd never been to a doctor or definitely never been to a therapist or even really admitted to anyone that had an eating disorder, despite the fact that people had told me I had. I wouldn't admit it. And so I didn't really know anything about recovery, which turned out to be a good thing because I just did what seemed like common sense. I just ate a lot of food and followed my mental hunger. And I recovered pretty quickly and pretty robustly. And it was a while afterwards that I started to write a blog about my recovery. And then people started reading it, and then people started asking me to help them. And then I started writing books, and now I've written maybe 6 books, and I work as a recovery coach. But honestly, my work as a recovery coach, I used to do more of it, but now it's maybe an hour or so a day is not very much. I have a farm and I breed horses and I do a lot of other things. And recovery coaching is just a little bit that I do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's already can be so important for people to know, like, oh, sometimes knowing everything about recovery or like trying to consume so
Mm.
much stuff about recovery might not always be super helpful.
I agree. I think it would have been a deterrent because when I really did just decide I'm gonna get myself recovered, and I just ate in response to my mental hunger. And my mental hunger was constant. So I just ate all the time. And I just sort of knew that I had to eat all of the foods that I was afraid of. So I was just eating high fat, high calorie, processed foods. And I just ate and ate and ate and ate. And if I'd been in any sort of traditional treatment, I'm sure I would have been told that I have to follow a meal plan, and I would have been told that I shouldn't binge eat. And I would have been told all of these things that would have made me really afraid of doing exactly what I did. Um, Now, if we look at way back in, eating disorder history, then people have been dying from and recovering from eating disorders for a very long time. They're documented through to the Middle Ages. So long time. And that was before therapists existed. So the majority of people who would have recovered from an eating disorder and not died of starvation would have just sort of probably done it the common sense way that
Mhm.
I did. So, we mustn't get too wrapped up in therapy being the be all and end all to everything, because we have to remember that actually people have figured out mental health issues since humans have had brains. We figured that out. It's not a new thing to be able to figure that out. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the time, the actual wisdom as to how we figure it out is in us if we don't overthink it and if we just allow it to be simple and straightforward.
Hmm. I completely agree. And my journey was actually very similar, even the ages and the length of the recovery of the eating disorder. And then also, well, I honestly did overthink a lot because I did consume a lot of recovery content. I was in traditional free treatment once. And so even though I knew that I have mental hunger, that it's not me being obsessed or addicted to foods or anything like this,
Yeah.
I knew it and I listened to it, but I was still very confused and had so many voices around me that were talking about what if this is binge eating or what if it gets out of hand. And so I'm honestly very glad that I still listen to it. But I
Mm.
think that's one thing that a lot of people struggle with, to actually really listen to their mental hunger and to maybe even know what is mental hunger even, like how does mental hunger even show up? In that case, what would you say to somebody who's asking that question?
Well, mental hunger is really, really straightforward. Mental hunger is thinking about food in any capacity. So if food is the subject line of any thought that you have in your head, then that means that it's mental hunger. And so that's that's kind of for most of us, when we have an eating disorder, mental hunger is there the whole time. Um, um, I think that it really intimidates people, um, how much it's there and how constant it is. And people often say to me, "You can't mean that. Like, you don't mean that, right? And I'm like, no, because they're like, I'd just be eating the whole time. I've got mental hunger this whole time. I'm like, yeah, I said what I mean, and I mean what I said. You eat, mental hunger is there because your body is asking for food the whole time. And so that's what you do. And the beautiful thing about it, nobody believes this when they first go into recovery, but the beautiful thing about it is that as you nutritionally rehabilitate, your mental hunger starts to go away. And that's how you know. You don't even need to weigh yourself or eat any of that. You just know when you're getting to the right spot because the mental hunger goes away. It's like magic.
It is. It actually can feel that way. And yet a lot of people want to know some timeline. I want to know like how long does it take? Ask maybe
Yep.
how long does it take for you? What advice would you give somebody who's
So
like,
fear. Fear wants to know everything. Whenever we're afraid of something, we seek more information and we want to know and we want to know and we want to know. When's this happen? When's that going to happen? What's it going to look like? That's really normal process for a brain to go through when you're afraid of the process. So I think you have to understand that it's that fear that is causing you to feel like you need to know these outcomes. And the reality is that nobody can tell you. So you have to learn to accept not knowing, and you have to learn to accept that you don't want to accept not knowing. You have to be okay with the doubt and the thoughts and the I wish I knew. You just have to let all of those be there and understand that they're just going to be there and there's nothing you can do about them. And you have to just grow comfortable with them sitting right there, um, and accept that you're uncomfortable about the uncertainty of the outcome, I guess, is the thing.
that makes a lot of sense. And I think the more we resist this acceptance, the more fear comes up. That's at least something that I experience and that I also see in clients. Like the more we look for answers, but we nobody can give us this certain answer, the more fear we get. So the sooner we start accepting, the easier it could get. So yeah.
Um, yes. Yeah.
Um, in your books and also in some of your videos, you also speak a lot about breaking free from diet culture, stepping away from, a lot of diet culture's thoughts, behaviors,
Yeah.
everything, plays a role. Um, what practical steps can people actually take to like shift their mindset?
Um, okay. So I think that first of all, in order to be successful in eating disorder recovery, we have to understand that really what we're doing when we're recovering from an eating disorder is we are learning about, understanding, and then managing our fear response so that we can then teach ourselves out of our fear response, right? And that sort of applies to almost every single thing in eating disorder recovery. Anything that feels like an obstacle, anything that feels difficult, it's going to be difficult because you're afraid. And so if you understand how to manage, if you first of all, you need to be able to identify your fear response, which sounds like it should be really straightforward, but it's actually not, because a lot of the time we're so busy being in our fear response that we don't even identify our fear response. So it took me a very long time, for example, to understand that anger is a fear response. And so a lot of the time I would be angry at somebody, but I just feel angry at them. I hadn't sort of joined the dots that, oh, I'm angry because they're asking me to eat and I'm afraid, right? And so a lot of almost any negative emotional response that we have is we can tie back to a fear response. And when you have an eating disorder, that's almost always going to be fear of weight gain. And so it sort of really doesn't matter what the unique scenario or what the unique problem is. It's always going to be a fear problem. So if we can identify when we're having a fear response and understand that, then we're able to say, oh, I'm just afraid right now. That's the issue. And then once you understand that, not only and in the process of sort of being identifying your fear response and being able to say, oh, I'm afraid right now, that's the issue, then when we do that, we've actually just disengaged with our fear response. We're standing outside of it. We're not inside of the emotion anymore. We're like standing outside, looking at the emotion, going like, aha, I see that anger, and that means I'm afraid. Or, aha, I see that anxiety, and that means I'm afraid. And so the second that we did that, we disengaged with our fear response. And when we are in that spot, we are in control again, because we get to then say, no, I actually disagree that I should be angry right now. I think I'm going to make myself eat the thing I'm afraid of. Or I disagree that I understand that I'm anxious because of that food right there, or that I'm not doing exercise today. But actually, that's a fear response, and I'm going to carry on doing the thing that I'm afraid of, right? So that puts us back in control. When we can identify our fear response, we are then able to make a decision. And that's just going to be applicable for almost every scenario that we have an issue with in eating disorder recovery. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
It actually does. And I think it's a very, very great insight because oftentimes we think that, for instance, anger shows us that something is unfair. And it can feel unfair to, have to struggle, for instance, with, oh, I don't want to eat. Somebody tells me that I'm eating, but to just step out of the emotion, as you just said, I think is a very, very great, not only approach, but also like it's very important to know that and to be able to connect the dots and to then take control over the situation again. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's that is what recovery is all about. That's what recovery is all about. Now the reason that our fear responses are so vast, like our fear response can take on a plethora of different emotional um presentations. And it's because we're dealing with our brain, and our brain is very clever. And if you think about this problem from your brain's point of view, your brain believes that gaining weight is a threat to you, and your brain's job is to keep you away from threat. That's the brain's priority number one job that's evolved to think is the most important thing in the world, is keeping you away from threat. So your brain has this job, right? I must not let my human do anything that could cause weight gain. And so your brain then, in order to achieve that job, has access to everything about you. And it has access to your perception as well. Your brain can alter your perception. So your brain can make you feel things that are not true or do not exist or any of those things. But because your brain has your perception, it can press all of those buttons. And so this is where it gets tricky in eating disorder recovery, because in the moment, it can feel really true that you're just angry at that person because it's not fair and you'd already eaten something. It can feel like it's true. And what we have to learn is that just because something feels like it's true does not necessarily mean it is true. It means that your perception is telling you it's true. And that is controlled by your brain, which your fear response has access to. And so we have to be very good at getting suspicious about what our own brains are telling us, and sort of understanding that when it comes to the subject matter of food, exercise, recovery stuff, we cannot trust our perception, because our perception is altered by fear. Our perception is infiltrated by fear, right? Our perception is changed by fear. And so that's sort of in recovery, you have to really understand that I can't trust my perception. When you're fully recovered, you can, because that fear won't be there anymore influencing your perception. We'll have got rid of it when you're fully recovered. That's the whole point of full recovery. But for the process of recovery, you just actually have to accept, can't trust my own brain, actually,
Yeah.
which people feel like, people sort of like, oh no, I could never sing that. But then actually when they sort of really understand it, they're like, yeah, no, actually I can see that when my brain tells me that I feel like I've gained 20 pounds, that can't even be possible, to happen in a 10-minute, it could not be possible that I gained 20 pounds since I ate that piece of cake 10 minutes ago. Not possible. Yet my brain is telling me, and I feel like I feel like it's true. That's an example of your brain altering your perception
Yes.
to try and influence you to behave a certain way. And we just have to get really, really on top of our own brains. And this is what I'm talking about when I say understanding your fear response. It's understanding that your fear response can make you feel things
Yeah.
are true. It can make you perceive things that aren't there. And that sounds like it's a dirty trick, but it's just your brain trying to do its job of keeping you safe, right? And
Yeah.
so understanding our fear response is just really getting to know these things so that when it happens, you can go, I know that I feel like I gained 20 pounds, but also know that's just my brain altering my perception, and I'm not going to pay any attention to it.
Yeah. Very, very important, especially when it comes, for instance, to like body image. You just mentioned it, the feeling, or even seeing something in the mirror, seeing like a body change in the mirror that we rationally know just can't even happen in such a short amount of time. And yet it can feel so overwhelming. And I think for a lot of people, as you said before, the fear of weight gain and also like, being in a body that changes and struggling with body image, struggling with comparison are like huge topics.
Yep.
And for a lot of people, it's so important to understand or to like have practical tips or ideas on how to stop not only um, comparing the own body to other people, whether it's like people in their lives or people on the internet or whatever. But a lot of people also wonder how they can, step away from body checking, how they can cope with bad body image outside of understanding that a lot of the things that we perceive might not even be the reality. What
Yeah.
other things would you advise somebody who's struggling with body image and comparison?
Yeah. So not all people with eating disorders have negative body image. And I actually didn't when I had an eating disorder. But, over years of coaching people and outside of sort of eating disorder coaching, I've recognized that negative body image is actually a huge problem for a lot of people. So I wrote a book about that just recently, just a little one, because it's the same. We can teach our brain out of negative body image. And the first thing to understand about that is that negative body image is something that is taught to our brain. The brain has learned that, right? Nobody comes out of the womb not liking their body. It's taught to the brain via our culture most commonly, right? And so sucky as that is, it's still good news because if our brain has been taught something, it means that we can teach it something alternative. The brain's really good at learning. And I think a lot of the time when it comes to brain stuff, negative body image, people just kind of go like, oh, it's just something I'm always going to have. Like it's something that you can't kind of do anything about. And I'm
Mm.
like, no, 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 no. That's like saying, I don't know how to speak French and I'm never going to be able to do anything about it. Of course you could. You could teach yourself French. You can teach yourself out a negative body image. You absolutely can. Now, the second problem with that is that sometimes even when people understand that, like in the way that I might understand, I could speak French if I taught myself, then there's that whole thing of like, ugh, but that's hard. Learning's hard. Ugh, I don't want to do it. And that's a different problem. But I think if somebody is actually very motivated to change things, which a lot of people with negative body image are, because it sort of does ruin a lot of things, then that's just sort of an obstacle. That's just an obstacle of just sort of like the, oh, I don't want to do that work that people have to get over. Because it is some work and it takes consistency and it takes a bit of time, but actually not that long. We're talking weeks, not months, actually. But it does take consistency. And that's where you really have to understand I have to commit to this path. I have to commit to, I am demonstrating this to my body. And then I think that the most important thing to understand about all of this, because like I said, negative body image is taught by our culture. However, it's mostly taught by ourselves. And the way that that works is your brain is always watching you. It's watching everything you do. It's watching everything you say. And it's also watching the thoughts that you pay attention to. Because our brains are having thoughts all the time, but we don't pay attention to all of them. We only pay attention to the ones that we think are important. And the brain is learning from everything we do, physically, actions. The brain is learning from everything we say. And the brain is learning from the thoughts that we pay attention to. So the way that negative body image often gets so strong is, first of all, primarily, people act as if there's something wrong with their body. And this teaches the brain there's something wrong with my body. People talk about their bodies as if there's something wrong with them. And that teaches the brain that there's something wrong with their bodies. And people think about their bodies as if there's something wrong with them, which also teaches the brain there's something wrong with your body. So if you understand that actually your actions, your words, and your thoughts inform your brain, it's like, oh shit, well, I'm actually always acting as if I don't like my body. So how do you expect your brain to like your body when you're acting as if you don't like your body? You're literally teaching it every hour, every day that there's something wrong with you. And then you're being like, oh, my brain's so annoying. Why has it got negative body image? Well, it's like, it's because you're still teaching it that, right? And so what understanding that is kind of the main thing, because then if you understand, well, I want to teach my brain something different. I actually want to teach my brain that there's nothing wrong with my body. Then, in order to do that, you have to change the way you act towards your body. You have to change the way that you talk about your body. And even harder, but still possible, you have to stop paying attention to negative thoughts about your body. And if you can consistently do those three things, then your brain will start to think differently and feel differently about your body because you are teaching it. So, long story short, most simply put, if you want to teach your brain to like your body, you have to start acting as if you like your body.
Mm-hmm.
Really is as simple as that. And if you can consistently start to act and talk about your body as if you like it, your body image issues will change
Yeah.
because body image issues are taught to the brain. Didn't just come up with them, they're taught. And so if you actually stop doing that, they'll change. And it's really worth it because life is so much nicer if you actually don't hate yourself.
It is. It is. And I think it might even sometimes be those little sneaky things, like somebody constantly sucking in their belly, for instance.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, those like super sneaky things that we might have been taught even as kids or in magazines or however, or like we taught ourselves. So I think it might even be more tricky to even recognize those things that because they seem so normal to some people than to
Yep,
actually change them. Yeah.
yep, yep. No, it's definitely, you have to do a little bit of work kind of understanding your own body, you
Yes.
have to do a little bit of work, even because sometimes the negative body image thoughts and the actions that you do feel so normal that you don't even realize you're doing them. And so you have to bring awareness to them for a start. Um, and once you've done that, then things tend to start to make a little bit more sense. But I'm trying to think of like other examples. Like another common example is people um really sort of commonly wearing really baggy clothes
Hmm.
or dressing themselves in clothes that they're not necessarily dressing themselves in those clothes because they like those clothes. They're dressing themselves in those clothes because they're trying to hide their body because they think that they need to.
Yeah.
That is acting as if there's something wrong with your body. If you didn't think there was something wrong with your body, you would wear clothes that you actually liked. And so it's just things like that, actually understanding that when I dress like that every day, I'm actually teaching my brain that I don't like my body.
Yeah. I completely agree. Like there's so many little things. Another one is definitely, in my opinion, also movement and like not even like exercise where we're like, okay, I've stopped exercising, but I'm still doing all those little movements. And I think you did
Mm.
like an amazing job explaining that in one of your books, Neurorewiring for people with eating disorder recovery, um, where you really talk about the importance of also paying attention to those little things, not only the big walk in the morning or whatever, but like all those subtle movements that can still play into the eating disorder. Um,
Yep, yep. There's it's the same thing really. It's the same stuff that you have to learn and understand in order to teach your brain out of an eating disorder. It's the same stuff that you need to do in order to teach your brain out of negative body image. It's the same. And so it's just sort of like applying it to this and understanding it in this respect.
yeah. And I think one thing that might be helpful for everyone who's watching right now, even if you feel like you can't even remember a life without an eating disorder, I know that a lot of people struggled even with like either with disordered eating or with an eating disorder, it can feel like their whole life or for so long that they feel like I don't even remember, I don't even know what it is without it, but it's still possible. And I feel like we're on the same page when it comes to that. As you just said, your brain learns so that your brain can also learn new things and your brain can also learn life without an eating disorder, life without negative body image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And it doesn't actually take that long if you're really consistent with understanding what you need to do in order to teach your brain out of these things and then consistently doing it. The brain learns really fast and it gets easier really fast. You'll be so surprised at how things that seem like I always have these thoughts, I'm never going to get away from these thoughts. Actually, you start to realize like, oh, like that actually has changed. And how quickly it can change.
Yeah. Um, we have like answered so many, questions and like talked about so many topics already. Even after hearing all that, even after hearing how important it is to just not only understand the brain, but like really act on it, like listen to your mental hunger, to rest, to start acting like you like your body. Even if now somebody still feels stuck in recovery or still feels super afraid, do you have
Mm.
any advice for them when the fear gets so overwhelming?
Well, yes. So I've talked about understanding a fear response. The the whole sort of point behind understanding your fear response is so that you can learn to disengage from your fear response. And that is not only a super skill, but it is something that you absolutely have to be able to do in order to recover from an eating disorder is to disengage from your fear response. Um, if you can't see something, then you can't disengage from it. You're just in it. And so that ability to recognize, oh, I'm having XYZ emotional response, that in itself actually gives you then the ability to choose whether or not you're going to engage with that emotional response. Now, this sounds like it's something that's like super alien, but it's not. We actually do it all the time, just in society. You know, somebody in a shop might really piss you off and you really want to get angry and yell at them, but that's not acceptable. So you take a deep breath and you disengage from that emotional response and you smile at them and you walk on. That is the same thing. It's just a little bit harder because when we're dealing, because our fear response is like the primary emotional response that our brain will pay attention to. So it's a little bit harder. However, it's not impossible. And most people, when they're in eating disorder recovery, if they've even worked out how to do that once, like they might be doing something that their brain is just freaking out about, and they work out how to disengage from that emotional response. So when I say disengage from the emotional response, that doesn't mean you can make the emotional response stop. You can't. But it's like you're aware that your brain is generating feelings of guilt or feelings of anxiety or feelings of I'm going to panic. You're aware of that. But it's like you're just letting it sit there next to you and you're not doing, it's not even up to, you don't even have to do anything about it. It's kind of not your problem. And that's disengaging from the emotional response. So we can't stop the brain generating the emotional response, but we can disengage from it. And when we do that, it means that that emotional response is not having any impact on us. And that is the key. Because when we are engaged with an emotional response, we are in that emotional response. So we're in the anxiety, we're in the panic, we're in the that is exhausting. And it also means we're in our sympathetic nervous system, which doesn't make us very reasonable or able to think very well. That's our fight or flight one.
Mm.
When we recognize that we're having an emotional response but choose to sit outside of it, then we're still in our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one where we can think really well. And additionally, on top of that, we're not getting exhausted by all those crazy emotions. It's just like, it's just like that. Your brain can be having a massive tantrum, but it's just like it's just sitting next to you. The tantrum's just sitting next to you, despite the fact it's going on in your head. And you're just carrying on about your day, doing your thing, not even paying attention to it, right? So that means that you're still in your parasympathetic nervous system, which means your brain can learn, actually. It can build neural pathways, it can learn. And just by doing that, just by disengaging from that emotional response, you are actually teaching your brain out of that emotional response. You're teaching it because your brain's like generating an emotional response. It might be generating panic because you just ate something more than usual. But you're just like not panicking. You're just like, no, brain, actually, I'm not going to do that. That actually starts to teach your brain that maybe panic is not the required emotional response after eating more than usual because you're not engaging with it. So your brain's like going like, oh, well, my human's rejecting this emotion. So maybe we don't need to panic after eating anymore. Maybe it's fine. So you're actually starting to teach your brain out of those emotional responses. But if you engage in the panic, then you're actually reinforcing, yes, panic is relevant after eating. And your brain will keep generating it even more. And so being able to disengage from emotional response, like it's something that therapists hate. Therapists always tell you to engage in every emotional response and all your emotional responses are important, blah, 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 blah. I completely disagree with that in respect to eating disorder recovery, because an eating disorder is an errant fear response that we're trying to get rid of, that we're trying to teach the brain out of. And the way that we're going to teach the brain out of that is by behaving as if we're not afraid and actually rejecting that fear response when it comes up and saying, no, brain, actually, there's nothing to be afraid of. So we're not doing that anymore. And your brain will cotton on pretty fast. The brain will learn quickly if you're consistent. Problem with that is the inconsistency. So you might be able to disengage from your fear response about, like one thing, and then the next thing comes along and you panic and you go into it. You just reinforced it again. So, you're kind of having a bit of a back and forth if you're inconsistent. So you have to be very determined to be consistent, But people with eating disorders are really good at that. We're actually really good at being determined, and we're very good at being consistent should we decide to.
Yes. And I think this is so important to understand. Like, it is important to be consistent with it. It is important, as you just said, like, oftentimes we learn to, engage with our emotions. And I do think that oftentimes allowing ourselves to feel emotions can be helpful. But in this very matter, as you just said, it might actually be more helpful to understand, like, I'm not engaging in the panic. I'm just gonna, teach my brain, I'm gonna teach myself that there's nothing to be afraid of, whether it's a number on the scale, whether it's a changing body, whether it's a food I ate. And then, as you just said, over time, the brain will learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. I will definitely link your books down under the interview, your website. So if everyone, wants to learn more about you so that they can. Thank you so much for taking the time, for writing
Yeah.
those books also, and for
Mhm.
doing the work that you're doing.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much.